Hey, how are you feeling, Tony?
I'm feeling great. Great. How's everybody out there? Woo! Come on, let's get some energy in this room. We're right before lunch. Come on. How many of you are founders? That's the first thing we need to kind of get into. How many of you are investors? All right.
Still keeping my hand up.
That's awesome. Good group.
Tony, why are you bothering with online identity when we've already got Facebook?
I think that's an easy one. You know, the thing about when we started About.me, and for me, About.me is, you know, kind of my last company. It's an idea that I've been kicking around for a long time. And it just kind of kept grabbing me, if you want. It's such a simple idea, but we live in this day and age where we have all kinds of slivers of our identity that are on the web. You, in LinkedIn, are one person. You're very professional, Jyri. In Facebook, you have your social graph. In Twitter, you maybe are unedited. You say silly things sometimes, whatever. But
some things that I regret later.
Yeah, absolutely. And so none of those things really kind of represent who I actually really am, right? And my kind of journey to being who I am and who I aspire to be going forward. And what we thought there was an opportunity to do was to bring all of that information together in a very simple kind of splash page, if you want, just a single page that A, captures a photo of you, B, like who you are as a person, what you do professionally, and the things that you want to share broadly in a public kind of forum, right? If you think about, if you look at me on LinkedIn, I look like a weenie. Right? I look like seriously, I look like a little wonk, like a business wonk. I'm this kind of guy, right? But it doesn't capture any of the reality of who I am as a person. Doesn't tell you that I grew up in a small farming community. Doesn't tell you that I'm into skateboarding. It doesn't tell you that I'm a father. It doesn't tell you anything, right? About who the context I am as a person. So if you think about it in real life, how many of you, everybody here has done an interview before. When you sit down with a good interviewer, that interviewer doesn't just start drilling you on your last job. A good interviewer takes a moment and tries to figure out some context and to put you at ease, but also to kind of figure out who the heck you are as a person, right? So where are you from? Oh, are you a Chicago Cubs baseball fan? Well, those kind of things are really important.
Well, you know, which brings us to you, Tony, as a person. Small farm, Indiana. It's not unlike, you know, Mäntyharju. Indiana is kind of like the Mäntyharju of the United States. What happened on that farm?
On that farm, well, so the community I grew up in is about 6,000 people. It's a classic community that in our last election, you know, was, you know, the type of place that I think Trump might have been talking about and Clinton might have been talking about, where jobs have left. 3 of the 4 factories are gone. Yeah. But the high school I went to, there was 122 kids in my class, and 9 of us went on to university. So it's not a bastion of education and kind of higher ideals, if you want.
So wait, 122 kids.
9.
How many went? 9. So that's less than 10%.
Yeah, definitely less than 10%.
Went to university.
Yeah. So
were you one of those 9 kids?
I was one of those 9 kids, absolutely.
You and the other 8.
Bingo. So I think for me, when I was growing up in that community, it was fairly clear that I wasn't going to be there when I got older. I kind of knew that at a very young age, not in a disrespectful way, but just in a way that I knew that my life was going to kind of move outside of that. And so it's worked out.
Well, one of the things that I like about working with you is the fact that there isn't just one Tony. You know, there's Tony, the founder of About.me, which is a substantial, significant player in this space of, you know, basically giving what I see as the younger cohort of internet users who may not yet have a history of work, you know, they may not have a long CV to put on LinkedIn. About.me kind of is the perfect place for them to start off. Now, but at the same time, you're also a venture capitalist at True Ventures, which is a Silicon Valley-based fund. And I was an entrepreneur looking for financing, and you guys invested in me. And the reason that I felt so good about that investment, going back, I was thinking about this morning when on my way here, was that I felt like I was getting other entrepreneurs as investors, which to me was a really significant thing. I didn't want suits. I didn't want more, big company people. I didn't want finance people. I was looking for another entrepreneur. And so, how did you end up becoming an investor? What was your first investment?
So I got lucky. So my first investment was a company called Danger. And Danger was basically the first smartphone. Andy Rubin, who went on to create Android at Google. But Andy, I remember he came in and he wasn't like any other entrepreneur, in 1996. He didn't dress the part. He didn't, we were still in a convention where people weren't wearing T-shirts and tennis shoes. Coming to an investor, you're gonna present yourself in a certain way. Not Andy. Andy walked in, shirt untucked, no presentation, walked up to a whiteboard, and he just mapped it out. And I thought, wow, he's so cocky, he's so awesome, I'm so in. And that was a really good first investment.
Wow. I didn't know that you were the first investor in Danger. That's amazing. Okay. Well, what happened then? What's the weirdest product that you've ever invested in?
So lately we invested for you here in Finland. I don't think you'll know it, but I think you will learn about it in the next years. A coffee company, actually, oddly enough, nothing to do with tech, founded by a gentleman by the name of James Freeman. It's called Blue Bottle Coffee.
Blue Bottle Coffee.
There's about 30 cafes now. A company that's clearly on a trajectory to...
Wait a second. So a coffee company.
A coffee company.
In the world of tech and Silicon Valley?
Well,
how did that happen?
So let's take a step back, right? So I remember how this happened. I started meeting with James because I was passionate. I like coffee, right? Like a lot of people. And I'm kind of a bit of a nerd about it. And Blue Bottle, in the world of coffee nerds, it's the ceiling, right? It's kind of amazing. And so I sat down with James more out of curiosity, but as I started to learn about his business, and more importantly, the reasons he was like building Blue Bottle, I looked at it and I thought, he sounds just like a young Matt Mullenweg, from WordPress, or an Andy Rubin, or any other person that I've met who is like kind of very OCD and has that, what I'll call, capacity to be a founder of a movement. So they're not the creators of a particular space, but they become the face of it, like a Brie Pettis at MakerBot. We can talk about it in a few minutes. It's another good example. So James, when I sat down with him, he was like, well, you understand it's about the procurement of beans and what type of farmers you work with and their adherence to sustainability, and that they're adhering to organic processes, and there's single origin, and there's fair trade buying practices. And I'm like, okay, whoa, slow down. And then he's like, but at our cafes, there's no internet, there's no Wi-Fi, there's no plugs. We want to be really clear that we want people to talk. There's no espresso drinks to go. They're meant to be consumed on premise in a very specific cup. So he had a whole point of view about how his product intersects with our lives, right? And I've learned that when you find those people, you should really kind of just take a step back, listen, and let them guide you, because James's point of view was so pure and so honest and so genuine that what you realize is that he's not going to sacrifice that point of view for anything. And so if he's a reasonable person, or she's a reasonable person that you can work with, what happens is that you can actually bring a different skill set or surround them with people with different skill sets. In this case, Brian Meehan, who was the operating chairman and also the lead investor in pulling together the round, became James's partner, right? And today, honestly, in a couple of 3 years, I think it's probably one of the most iconic brands being built in the world today.
Well, there's something you just said there that caught my ear, which is this founders of movements. So these are not founders of companies, they're founders of something else. Can you talk, what does that mean? Like, what distinguishes somebody who's a founder of a movement?
So the distinction is kind of what I was saying about having a vision for how my product or my service intersects with your life and how it changes your life in a profoundly important way. So the coffee example, when I pushed James on it, so how's it actually changing anybody's life? And he looked at me, and it was almost kind of like he was flabbergasted. He's like, are you kidding me? Half the world wakes up and one of the first things they do is they drink a cup of coffee. Why shouldn't it be delicious? Why shouldn't it be a beautiful experience? Why shouldn't it be something that helps to onboard their day to make a difference, right? And I hadn't really kind of thought about it that way. But like when you get to a Matt Mullenweg who's going to democratize media and give everybody a voice, and you wake up and you see something like Arab Spring happen, which is attributed to social media, but the reality is what they were tweeting were their blog posts, right? So it's what they were giving voice and depth to a conversation that needed to happen.
Well, let me just stop there. And so so we have this idea of yourself as a founder. You've had this journey that started on a farm and ended up in the valley. There's a bunch of companies you've created and a lot of value. And then these other founders now. So it sounds to me like there's some kind of a driving motive behind Tony Conrad. How would you describe that? What are you trying to accomplish with all this?
Well,
where's all this going?
Well, I think when you grow up in the environment that I grew up in, it's not an obvious linear path, right, to do what I do today. And the thing that, I knew from the very beginning was, to be industrious, right? And to get involved and to do things and to be active.
Is there something there that you wouldn't put on your resume? Or that's not
in
mentioned
fact, I think everybody in the audience here will probably relate to this because so much of what's important about you, really, when you get down to like your fundamental core DNA of who you are as a human being and who you aspire to be, right, is really rooted in those early foundational experiences you had in your youth of what you did with your time, right? I did things like I worked in a factory on a glue machine. I was a little league umpire. I was a camp counselor. I was a janitor. I stocked tampons on a grocery shelf, condoms on a grocery shelf. I did all kinds of random jobs. And, when I look at those jobs, I understand that I had the capacity to believe in myself, right? And to bet on myself, right? I always had that core belief. And I think that's what's so important when you're in those moments, which undoubtedly happen, right? It's not all just this. I don't care who's, Chris Sacca did a great job yesterday explaining to you some of his ebb and flow, but it's not a linear line to greatness, like it really isn't. It's just full of potholes and ebb and flow and turns, and it's those foundational experiences you can draw upon, which get you through it.
If you look, who was the youngest entrepreneur that you ever invested in?
Matt Mullenweg. When I first started talking to Matt, he was like 17, 18 years old.
Who's Matt?
Matt Mullenweg's the founder of WordPress. 27% of all websites in the world today run on WordPress.
My blog runs on WordPress.
Probably the largest company. Nobody talks about that frequently in the press. It's a company called Automatic.
So how old was he?
Matt right now is 32.
Well, how old was he when this happened? When you first
18.
met him? 18.
18.
So that's,
We talked on the phone. It was a little weird.
Yeah.
I asked him if he'd introduce me to his mom. I'm an old dude living in California talking to an 18-year-old in Houston, Texas, a kid who had never seen snow. And I felt it was important to make a connection to his parents. Did his mom get on the phone
with you?
I'm sorry?
Did his mom get on the phone with you?
I ended up meeting his mother.
Yeah.
And, it's clear that he's...
What was the conversation like?
I think for Matt's mother is, California looked like a fairly probably progressive place and a different place. And, the same things I would have concerns of for my 18 or 19-year-old, like where am I sending them or where am I letting them go? I don't have much control over the decision, but wow, like who are they going to be surrounded with?
So
and
at this point, WordPress didn't exist yet as a company.
well, WordPress did exist. It actually started off as an open source. WordPress at its core is an open source project, right? And it continues to be that today.
So
but the company Automatic, the for-profit aspect of it, did not exist.
So he was a young kid. He was working on this open source project, and you invited him to California.
Well, he invited himself to California.
And then
I thought it was a good idea.
What happened next?
He came, he worked with CNET. He worked with a guy by the name of Shelby Bonnie, excellent guy, great mentor, surrounded himself with the right type of people.
Well, let's just stop right there. I mean, if he, young 18-year-old founder comes into, he's got an open source project. He goes to, CNET's one of the biggest media brands in the world. How did that negotiation happen?
Well, so one of the things that was really important was to make sure that CNET would not own the IP of the work Matt was doing on WordPress.
Well, I would assume they were expected to
when
own
you
it.
join Google or any big company, one of the things they often ask you to do is to sign over your any inventions that you do during your time working there. And so we knew enough about that, or I knew enough about that, along with Tony Schneider and others. And we just guided Matt and guided CNET to make sure that he was able to continue to work on those things.
So you came in as Matt's advisor to make
As a mentor,
sure that
yeah.
he kept the intellectual property that he was creating, so he was able to turn it into a product.
Yes, but the thing that, my relationship with Matt, and I feel this way, I feel passionate about a lot of the relationships I have with founders. My relationship with Matt is probably the most profoundly important one in my life, because of the arc and the breadth of the relationship. It started off me being somebody that he maybe wanted to emulate a little bit, right? And it's evolved to a point where, I've been his advisor, I've been on his board, I've been his investor, he's an advisor to me, he's a mentor to me. I've learned as much from him as he has learned from me. He has made me youthful. He has opened my eyes to a whole world of the web. I saw the social web before anybody, I think, was seeing the social web, because Matt was building the social web, right? And interactivity and comment streams and shared photos and all those things that you can do in an operating system like WordPress. And so, and we kind of fast forward to today, and he's a friend. Right,
Yeah.
And I think that's an amazing gift to be able to take from our industry when you get to work with people like that.
Yeah, I think that's one, a lot of the things around, the conference here also, there's a lot of pitching. It's a lot about, it centers on these transactional things about, somebody's raised a bunch of money, or somebody's sold a lot of products, somebody's gotten a lot of users. There's this idea of these transactions happening, but it sounds like it's more about the relationship and the people.
I think if there's going to be any advice to any entrepreneur, no matter how old you are, and if you're getting into the game or you're at the early part of the game, it really is a contact sport. And it is about, and when you're out there and you're really forcing yourself to touch and bump up to it, you're going to see some of the underbelly. You're going to see some of the nastiness of what a community can bring. And you have to figure out how to navigate that. But the most important thing is that you find people that you think make consistently good decisions and mid to long-term decisions, and who are appropriately aggressive, but not in an unethical way, right? And if you find that group of people, it will serve you incredibly well. So when if we continue to think about WordPress and Matt, it's utter bullshit to think that somebody like me has played any role in building that company, right? When investors say, we built blah, 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 I always just come on, give me a break, right? But I do think that I've played an incredible role in helping to cocoon Matt at times, and to create the right buffer and the right access to networks, that he was going to be able to not just build WordPress, but build WordPress in a way that ultimately he was going to feel very proud of, right? Because he was going to build WordPress with or without somebody like me. So the question is, what does it look like at the end?
But what about the other side? You mentioned this, I'm going to just tack on that underbelly part for a little bit. Here we are, we're talking
Everybody
about,
wants the underbelly.
We've been talking about WordPress, we can talk about Fitbit or MakerBot or, all these, fantastic, successful exits and investments and all the success and the glory of Tony Conrad. But what was the worst investment you ever made?
Well, I won't tell you the founder's name, nor will I name the company. But there's definitely one that comes to mind where the founder's name was part of the name of the company.
Is that a sign?
That's a pretty bad sign.
It's a pretty bad sign.
It's really about.
I don't know if any of you founders out there,
them.
Thought about naming your companies after yourselves. Maybe give that a second thought after this.
But I think what I learned about that was the art of deception, right? That a founder or people in our community can be incredibly skilled at. It's the reality is here, but you're over here. And it's what they don't tell you, right? Is what to listen for and to pay attention to. The best fibbers, liars, misleaders, whatever you want to call about in our community are not people that outright lie. It's just what they choose not to tell you, right? That is phenomenal. So I think we're done.
We're done.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Tony.